Salvatore Briguglio didn't speak unless he had to. When he did, his voice came out soft, never raised, never nervous, the kind of voice that made grown men sweat because it didn't match the blood on his hands. He was known as Sally Bugs, and if you heard that name mentioned in the back room of a bar, you knew somebody wasn't waking up tomorrow. He stood 5'9", wiry but strong, and his eyes were dark, not just in color, but in soul. People swore he could look straight through a man and already know if he'd fold, fight, or run. That's what made him dangerous, not the gun in his waistband, not the garrote wire he always carried in his sock, but the way he'd look at you like he already buried you yesterday. In 1975, Sal was working out of a Teamsters union hall in New Jersey, the same one tied to Hoffa. Everyone knew it was a front. If you walked into that place asking about trucks, they'd smile politely and tell you deliveries were made elsewhere. But if you walked in quiet, maybe with an envelope, a problem, or a name, they'd bring you to the back room. That's where Sal sat, usually with a coffee. No sugar, no cream, just black, like the pit he'd dump your body in if the money was right. On a hot July night, days before Jimmy Hoffa vanished, Sal hadn't been sleeping. Not well anyway. His dreams were filled with heavy breathing, flashes of red, muffled screams. The dead never talked to him in words, just feelings. A weight on his chest, a sharpness in his lungs. Sometimes he woke up gasping, like someone had tried to drown him in his own bed. But every morning, he still made his coffee, still combed his slick black hair, still tied his shoes with methodical calm. Salvatore had done bad things. That wasn't up for debate. But what haunted him wasn't the faces of the men he killed. It was the silence they left behind. That emptiness. The kind of quiet that followed him everywhere, even in crowded places. He once told a bartender in Queens, "Sleep's only peaceful if you got no soul left." The bartender laughed. Sal didn't. On July 27th, Tony Provenzano, a known Genovese capo, summoned Sal to a diner in Jersey. It was always diners. Something about the clink of coffee cups and the smell of fried eggs made men feel normal while talking murder. Tony sat in the corner booth, 2 bodyguards flanking him, but when Sal walked in, they both shifted like something cold just entered the room. "Sit, Sally," Tony said. "Got a favor." Sal didn't ask questions. He just sat, lit a cigarette, and waited. "You ever been to Detroit?" Sal nodded once. Tony leaned in close, voice barely above a whisper. Hoffa's running his mouth again, making waves, calling people out, thinking he's still untouchable. Sal didn't flinch. He's got to go, and it's got to be clean. Permanent. You understand? There was a long silence. Sal sipped his coffee. Tony pushed a small piece of paper across the table. "This is where he'll be. 2 p.m., July the 30th. No mistakes." Sal folded the paper once and tucked it in his coat. He didn't say yes. He didn't need to. As he stood up to leave, Tony called out, "And Sally, don't forget to sleep good this week. Might be your last chance." Sal nodded and walked out into the humid night. That was the last time anyone in Jersey saw him with both feet in this world. Something changed in Salvatore after that. He still moved like a ghost, always alone, always quiet, but there was something heavier in his step. He started smoking more, drinking less, not because he was focused, but because somewhere, deep down, he felt the heat of hell getting closer. And hell wasn't red flames or devils. For Sal, hell was a hotel room in Detroit, a knock on the door, and a man who once trusted you turning around too late. He checked into the Red Fox Motel under a fake name. Room 106. Twin bed. Rusted sink. Cigarette burns on the carpet. That's where he'd sleep, or try to, until the job was done. Only problem was, sleep didn't come easy anymore. The motel room smelled like mold and old cigarettes. Salvatore sat on the edge of the twin bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The Red Fox was the kind of place nobody asked questions. The front desk clerk didn't even look him in the eyes when he paid cash and signed the book as Anthony Gallo. That name meant nothing, just another ghost floating through town. It was the kind of place you didn't stay if you wanted peace. Outside, trucks rumbled past on the cracked road. A couple next door fought so loud he could hear every curse. Sirens blared somewhere in the distance, not close but not far either. Still, none of it kept him up at night. What kept him up were the faces. Not the ones he killed. He'd made peace with those. It was the ones who trusted him, shook his hand, smiled like he wasn't a devil in a pressed shirt. That's the thing about men like Sal. You don't see the monster until it's too late. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. Not properly. He'd close his eyes and instantly feel the pressure, that crushing weight like someone sitting on his chest. He'd wake up sweating, lungs begging for air. Sometimes, he swore he could feel the grip of hands around his neck, even when he was alone. The job wasn't until July 30th. He had 2 days. 2 long, heavy, silent days. That morning, he walked across the road to a diner. Waitress didn't say much, handed him a menu, poured him coffee. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't need food, just something hot in his hands, something real. Across the room, a young couple laughed. College kids, maybe. He watched them for a while, not in a creepy way, just quietly, like someone watching a movie he didn't belong in. The girl smiled, leaned on the boy's shoulder, and for a second, Sal felt something strange. Like a memory trying to claw its way out of a locked box. He didn't remember what it felt like to be that innocent, that untouched. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his cup, not from fear, from years, from guilt, from tiredness so deep it settled into his bones. He didn't regret what he'd done, not most of it anyway, but he regretted what it had turned him into. As he stared into the coffee, dark as his conscience, someone slid into the booth across from him. No warning, no hello. Just the sound of a body sitting down. Sal didn't flinch, just looked up slowly. It was Chucky O'Brien. Chucky had been close to Hoffa once, practically raised by him, but lately he'd started leaning more toward Tony Provenzano's camp. Guys like Chucky were useful, loyal to whoever fed them best. "Sal," Chucky said, keeping his voice low. "He's expecting me. Same time, same place. I'm the one bringing him in." Sal nodded once. No emotion, no judgment. "You gonna be ready?" Chucky asked, not meeting his eyes. "I'm always ready," Sal said calmly. Chucky scratched his neck, looking uncomfortable. "You know he trusts me, right?" Sal looked out the window. "That's why it works." There was silence between them, heavy silence. Then Chucky slid a folded paper across the table. "Just in case plans change. Secondary location. A fallback." Sal didn't unfold it, just tucked it into his coat. "You staying close?" Chucky asked. Sal looked him dead in the eyes. "Room 106, Red Fox." Chucky's throat tightened. "You shouldn't be telling me that." "If I can't trust you," Sal said, "then I'm already dead." Chucky didn't respond. He stood up, dropped a few dollars on the table, and walked out without looking back. Sal sat for a while longer. Coffee cold now. Then he left a $5 on the table and walked back to the motel. The streets felt wrong. The air felt thick, like it was watching him. That's the thing about being in this life too long. You start feeling like shadows are following you, even when they're not. Back in his room, he locked the door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the bed again. He took out the paper Chucky gave him. A parking lot behind a restaurant. Quieter, less attention. He memorized it, then burned the paper in the metal ashtray beside the bed. He lay down, closed his eyes, and tried again. Sleep came, but it was shallow. In the dream, Hoffa sat across from him at a table. They were both eating spaghetti like old friends. Hoffa was smiling, eyes bright like he always had when he was ranting about the Union. "You know, Sal," Hoffa said, twirling pasta on his fork, "this country was built by men like us, working men, not suits, not Wall Street scum, but fighters." Sal nodded. "I ain't gonna let him push me out. I don't care what Tony says. I'll come back even if it kills me." Sal looked down at his plate. The spaghetti had turned into worms, black, slimy, wriggling worms. He looked up again. Hoffa was gone. In his place was a mirror, and in the mirror, Sal wasn't alone. There were bodies behind him, dozens, maybe hundreds, stacked like cordwood, all of them staring at him, eyes wide, mouths open. He woke up gasping, chest soaked in sweat. It was 3:12 a.m. Outside, a dog barked. Somewhere, a bottle broke. The city never slept. But Sal didn't either. He sat up, reached under the mattress, and pulled out his .38 revolver. Checked the chamber. 5 bullets. He only needed 1. Somewhere in his gut, something twisted. He'd killed before. Hell, he'd disappeared people off the face of the earth. But this wasn't like the others. This was Hoffa, the man who once gave him a job, who once looked him in the eye and said, "You're a good man, Sal. I trust you." He lit a cigarette and stared at the door. He could still walk away, but walking away meant running, and running meant dying slower. That afternoon, he made a call from a payphone down the block. The line buzzed, then clicked. A man answered, voice low. "Yeah? It's me," Sal said. "We're locked for the 30th. "You sure?" Sal didn't answer, just hung up. He walked to the corner liquor store, bought a small bottle of whiskey and a new pack of Camels. The clerk didn't look up from his magazine. That's how Sal liked it. Back in his room, he took a long pull from the bottle, wiped his mouth, and sat in the chair facing the window. He watched cars pass, faces blur, the sky turning gray with the weight of coming rain. He thought about his brother, Sammy, dead 6 years now, shot behind a bar in Newark over a gambling debt. Sal never cried for him. Couldn't. Crying was a weakness they trained out of him early. But tonight, he felt something in his throat, something tight, like regret trying to crawl its way out. When night came, he didn't turn on the lights, just sat in the dark, listening to the city breathe. His fingers tapped slowly against the glass of the whiskey bottle, a steady rhythm, tick, 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 like a countdown. Tomorrow was the 30th. Tomorrow he'd either be sleeping deep or not at all. And somehow, that felt okay. At least sleep would finally come, even if it was the kind you didn't wake up from. The rain started around 4 in the morning, soft at first, like a whisper against the roof of the motel, then heavier, turning the streets into slick black rivers. Salvatore sat by the window, watching the water pour down the glass like tears no one wanted to admit were there. He hadn't slept. Again. That made 3 nights. His body felt like it had weights hanging from every joint, head buzzing, muscles twitching now and then like they were reacting to danger that hadn't arrived yet. But it wasn't paranoia. Sal never believed in paranoia. He believed in signs, feelings, gut tugs that pulled you in the direction fate wanted you to go. He reached for the whiskey bottle, empty. He'd drained the last drop around 2, not for fun. He didn't even like the taste anymore. It just helped blur the edges. The sharp guilt. The questions he never asked out loud. A knock at the door, 3 soft taps, then silence. He stood up slow. No panic, no rush, just calm. He reached for his revolver, slipped it behind his waistband, and moved to the door. "Who is it?" "Chucky." Sal opened the door halfway. Chucky O'Brien stood there with wet hair, a gray windbreaker, and nervous energy radiating off him like a broken radio. "You're up early?" Sal said. "Couldn't sleep." Chucky forced a smile. "You look like hell." "I feel worse." Chucky stepped inside. He didn't bother shaking the rain off, just stood awkwardly near the foot of the bed. Sal closed the door, flicked the lock, and sat back down in the chair by the window. "We're still on?" Chucky asked. "Yeah," Sal said. 2 p.m., Marcus Red Fox." Chucky nodded. "I'll bring him. He thinks we're going to meet Tony at the restaurant, that they're going to smooth it over." Sal stared out the window. "You tell him to wear a suit?" Chucky swallowed. "Yeah, like you said." "He's going to feel it," Sal said quietly. "He's not stupid." "No," Chucky said. "But he wants it so bad. He thinks they'll let him back in the Union. He thinks Tony still respects him." "He's wrong," Sal said flatly. Chucky sat down on the bed. The mattress squeaked under his weight. "You think he knows what's coming?" Sal looked at him now, eyes hollow but sharp. "You ever see a man dig his own grave and still believe someone's going to pull him out?" Chucky looked away. "I used to love him, like a second father." "I know." Silence filled the room like smoke, heavy, bitter. Sal finally spoke. "You don't have to be there after the drop. Just walk him in, say your part, and leave. You didn't see nothing." And if he doesn't go easy, Chucky asked, he will. Sal's voice was calm, like he was discussing the weather. He trusts you. They both sat there a moment longer, neither of them looking at the other. Then Chucky stood. I'll see you there? Sal nodded. Chucky reached the door, hesitated, then turned. You ever think about just walking away? Sal didn't answer. Chucky opened the door and disappeared into the rain. By noon, the city looked soaked in guilt. Gray skies, dripping awnings, people hunched under umbrellas like they were hiding from the world. Sal stepped out of the motel room dressed in a clean gray suit, thin tie, black leather gloves. His shoes were polished, but his soul felt like rust. He didn't bring much, just the revolver and the garrote wire in his sock. He didn't need more. This wasn't a war. This was a surgical procedure. Cut once, deep, then disappear. He got into the rented Ford Torino, turned the engine over, and pulled out onto the road like he had 100 times before. The route to the Macha's Red Fox was short, 15 minutes max, but he took the long way, wound through old neighborhoods, industrial blocks, broken down gas stations. He wasn't killing time, he was remembering. Every job left a smell, blood, fear, but Hoffa, this was different. This was history. At 1:47 p.m., he parked behind the restaurant, not in front, too obvious. He slipped through the alley, circled the building, and entered through the side door. Inside, it was quiet. The dining room was mostly empty, a few businessmen talking low over shrimp cocktails. Waitresses smiled without meaning it. The world moved like it always did, unaware. Sal walked to the back where the private booths were. Chucky was already there, alone. He's on his way, he said, eyes darting. Sal sat across from him, leaning forward. Don't fidget. You'll make him nervous. Chucky nodded. Then, you really gonna do it? Sal didn't answer, just stared at him. Cold, silent. At 2:08 p.m., Jimmy Hoffa walked in. He wore a navy blue suit, white shirt, red tie. His hair slicked back, eyes sharp. Still had that fire in him, that belief that he mattered, even when everyone else had moved on. He saw Chucky, smiled big. There he is, my guy. He didn't even see Sal at first, but when he did, he froze a little, just a half second, then recovered. Sal, he said, nodding. Didn't know you'd be here. Sal stood, offered a handshake. Hoffa took it, strong grip, too strong, like he needed to prove something. They sat. Waitress came, took drink orders. Nobody touched the menus. Sal watched Hoffa closely, every blink, every breath. So what's the story? Hoffa asked. Tony finally ready to bury the hatchet? Chucky played his part. He wants to talk, Jimmy, but he needs to know you're not going to make waves. You come in peaceful. Hoffa scoffed. Peaceful? They took everything from me. I built that damn union with my blood. Sal sipped his water. Then go remind them who you are. That seemed to light something in Hoffa. He straightened, nodded. Damn right. Chucky looked at Sal. Time. Sal stood slowly. We're moving to another location. Tony's waiting. Hoffa raised an eyebrow. Not here? Too public, Sal said. Too many ears. Hoffa hesitated, looked around, then shrugged. All right, let's go remind them. Chucky stood, his hands shaking slightly. Hoffa didn't notice. He was focused, burning inside with a sense of justice that didn't belong in this world anymore. They walked out together, into the car. Sal drove, Chucky up front, Hoffa in the back seat. The drive was quiet, just the hum of tires and the rhythm of the windshield wipers slicing the silence. They didn't go far, just a few blocks. An empty house, prepped the night before, curtains drawn, plastic on the floor. When they pulled up, Hoffa looked confused. This ain't no restaurant. Sal turned around, met his eyes. No, he said. It's not. In that moment, Hoffa knew. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Chucky got out of the car, fast, like the guilt was afire under his seat. Sal stayed still a moment longer, then got out too. Hoffa never screamed, never begged. He just looked betrayed. And that was worse. Back at the motel, Sal stood under the shower, water running cold. The blood was gone, but not the memory. He lay on the bed later, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy, but eventually it came. Dark, heavy, dreamless. For the first time in days, Salvatore Briguglio finally slept. The knock came 3 hours later. Salvatore's eyes opened before the sound finished traveling through the motel's thin door. Not the kind of wake-up where you ease into reality, stretch, and yawn. No, this was the kind where your hand goes straight under the pillow, fingers gripping cold steel, and your whole body turns to stone. He didn't breathe. He listened. No voice, no second knock, just one. Soft. 3 taps, like before. But he knew it wasn't Chucky. He rolled out of bed quietly, gun in hand, feet bare against the sticky carpet, heart steady, not fast, just alert. He pressed his back to the wall beside the door and waited. 20 seconds passed, then 30. Still nothing. Then footsteps. Slow. Walking away. He waited 2 full minutes before moving, then crept to the door, gun ready, and checked through the peephole. Empty. He opened the door a crack, nothing but damp air and the smell of cigarettes and mildew. He stepped into the lot, glancing both ways, just the wind. But something had changed. The air felt tighter, the silence no longer empty. It was loaded. He shut the door, bolted it again, and slid the chain on. He looked at the bed where he'd finally passed out. Sheets twisted, sweat stains still damp on the pillow. His mind was racing now, but his body felt heavy again. Sleep had come earlier, sure, but it hadn't been restful. It felt like a coma, a void. He didn't dream. He just vanished. And in that void, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared from the world. By the next morning, the story had broken. The front page of the Detroit Free Press read, "Teamster boss missing, foul play suspected." Sal read it while drinking coffee at the same diner where he and Chucky had met 2 days earlier. The waitress was different now, young, distracted, chewing gum. She didn't notice the way his hand shook slightly as he held the paper. The article was light on facts, but heavy on speculation. Hoffa had been last seen at the Machis Red Fox restaurant around 2 p.m., waiting for a meeting that never happened. No witnesses saw him leave. No car was reported stolen. His wife said he never made it home. His son, Jimmy Jr., had already called in political favors, and the FBI was on the case by sunrise. Sal calmly folded the paper, left $2 for the coffee, and walked back into the rain. The motel felt smaller now, tighter, like the walls had crept in an inch overnight. He took the .38 from under the mattress and wrapped it in a towel, shoving it in the bottom of his duffel bag. The garrote wire stayed in his sock, force of habit. He packed in silence. Every movement was automatic. Shirt, belt, razor, toothbrush. He didn't even think about it, just muscle memory. A routine honed by a decade of running from heat. But this time felt different. This time, the heat wasn't just cops, it was history. The plan was simple: disappear. Sal had done it before. Fake names, cash, burner addresses. He had contacts in Philly, a bolt hole in Atlantic City, and a girl he trusted in Reno, the only one who ever called him by his real name when they were alone. But this wasn't a gambling debt. This wasn't a warehouse brawl gone wrong. This was Jimmy Hoffa. You don't just ghost the most famous union boss in America without drawing eyes, and those eyes, they were hungry. That afternoon, as he sat in a Greyhound terminal with a ticket to Pittsburgh, a man sat down beside him. Mid-40s, cheap suit, thin tie, a mustache that looked glued on. "Sal," the man said casually, like they were old friends. Sal didn't look at him. "I don't know you." "You do." The man opened a folded newspaper. Inside the paper, instead of articles, were surveillance photos. One showed Sal with Chucky. Another showed Hoffa entering the restaurant. The man turned the page slowly. "You want to guess how many phones we tapped in the last 24 hours? 46. You want to guess how many were clean?" Sal didn't respond. The man sighed. "You think you're invisible, Sal, but nobody disappears clean. Not anymore. The world has too many cameras now, too many mouths. He folded the paper neatly, tucked it under his arm. You know the difference between you and Hoffa? He thought he was safe because of power. You think you're safe because of silence, but neither one works. Not forever. Sal finally turned to look at him. You FBI? The man smiled faintly. Something like that. Then arrest me. Oh, we're not ready yet. We're still digging. He leaned in, voice low. You know what makes a man break? It's not prison, not pressure, it's sleep. Or lack of it. Sal's eyes flicked, but his face didn't move. Pretty soon, the man continued, you'll start dreaming again. And those dreams will feel more real than anything else. The bed turns into a coffin. The air gets thick. You start hearing voices, doors creaking, boots walking toward you. He stood. We don't need to chase you. We just wait. And when your knees give out, when your eyes burn from 3 nights straight of watching your back, we'll be there. He walked away, leaving the paper on the bench. Sal didn't touch it. He stood, walked to the trash, dropped his bus ticket in without a word, and left the station on foot. By sundown, he was across town at a payphone, calling a number he hadn't used in 5 years. It rang once, twice. Then a woman answered. Yeah? It's me, Sal said. Silence. Then a soft breath. Jesus, I thought you were dead. Almost. You need a room? No, I need silence. I got both. She gave him an address, a basement apartment near the train tracks. Don't bring trouble, she said before hanging up. The apartment was small, 1 bed, 1 window, 1 light bulb that flickered. She met him at the door in slippers and a thin robe. Her name was Lena, and she was one of the few people who knew what he was, and didn't flinch. You look worse than the last time, she said, pouring him coffee. Didn't think that was possible. Sal sipped. You ever kill a man you respected? She lit a cigarette, leaned on the counter. Once. Broke my father's ribs. He bled out in his sleep. I was 15. Sal nodded. Then you understand. She didn't respond. That night he lay on the stiff mattress staring at the cracked ceiling. The train howled past every 20 minutes, rattling the walls. Sleep came in waves, short, jerky naps. In one, he saw Hoffa again. This time, the man was sitting in the backseat of a car, staring at Sal through the rearview mirror. No words, just eyes, hollow, accusing. Sal jolted awake, heart pounding, mouth dry. Lena was sitting in the chair across the room, watching him. Dream again? She asked. Yeah. Want me to stay up with you? He shook his head. No, I'm already dead, just not buried. She stood, walked over, and kissed his forehead. Not soft, not romantic, just human. Then she left him to the dark. The next morning, the FBI showed up at her front door. 2 agents, suits, no badges shown, but the tone was there. We're looking for Salvatore Briguglio, one said. You seen him? Lena didn't blink. He died 2 years ago, brain tumor. You sure? Yeah, I buried the bastard myself. The agent smiled faintly. If you see his ghost, let us know. Inside, Sal stood in the hallway, breath caught in his chest, listening through the vents. He didn't move for hours, he didn't blink, and he didn't sleep again for 3 more days. The trains kept him awake, not just the noise, though that was bad enough. The whole damn room shook every time one passed, like the building might buckle and crumble right on top of him. But it wasn't the sound. It was what the sound reminded him of, the rhythm, the screech, the low moan of metal on metal. It sounded like a man choking on his last breath. Sal hadn't slept more than an hour straight in days. He tried. God knows he tried. He'd lie down, shut his eyes, focus on his breathing, but something always came. A memory, a knock, a sound that wasn't a sound. Sometimes it felt like he was underwater. Other times it felt like he was already 6 feet deep and the dirt was getting heavier on his chest. And Hoffa was always there. Not angry, not even afraid, just disappointed. You were supposed to protect me, he'd say, not deliver me. Sal would wake with a jerk, soaked in cold sweat, fists clenched like he'd been fighting in his sleep. Then he'd sit in the dark, smoking another cigarette, listening to his own breath and the creaking pipes in the walls. He didn't know if he was being haunted or hunted. Maybe both. Lena had started watching him differently. At first, she was calm, just letting him crash in the basement apartment. No questions, no judgment. She'd known what kind of man he was for years, and that never seemed to scare her. But now, there was something in her eyes. A hesitation, like she wasn't sure which version of him would show up each time he walked through the door. "You're jumpy," she said one morning, handing him a plate of toast. "I'm not sleeping." "Yeah, no shit," she muttered. "You look like death's understudy." He didn't smile. He hadn't smiled in weeks. She sat across from him, watching his eyes scan the walls like they were about to cave in. "You need to get out of here, Sal. You're drawing attention." "Where would I go?" "Anywhere but here." He didn't answer, just sipped his coffee and stared at the floor. Later that day, while she was out, he peeled back the carpet near the window and stuffed the revolver under the floorboards. He didn't know why. Maybe instinct. Maybe paranoia. But something told him the next knock on the door wouldn't be from a friend. By the weekend, the neighborhood was crawling with feds. They didn't flash badges, didn't ask questions. They just lingered. In diners, at street corners, watching. One of them, the same guy from the bus station, the one with the fake mustache, made a point of sitting near Sal at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. "Coffee's good here," the agent said, sipping without looking up. "Strong, bitter." Sal kept his eyes on his newspaper. "You hear about the tip that came in?" the agent asked. "Anonymous call. Said Hoffa was taken out of state. Said there was a team, more than one trigger man. Said someone high up ordered it. Maybe New York, maybe Jersey." Sal turned the page. The agent leaned in just enough for his breath to touch the side of Sal's cheek. "We're getting close. You can feel it, can't you?" Sal stayed still, but his grip on the paper tightened. "You've been loyal, I'll give you that," the agent continued. "But loyalty doesn't mean a damn thing when both sides are waiting for you to crack. You're not going to sleep this off, Sal. You're going to rot with it." The agent stood and walked out. Sal waited a full 5 minutes before folding the paper, standing up and leaving in the opposite direction. That night, Lena came home to find him standing in the middle of the room, staring at nothing. "You okay?" He didn't answer. She set down the groceries, walked over, and touched his arm. He flinched so hard she almost screamed. "Jesus, Sal!" "They're closing in," he whispered. "Both sides." "The feds?" He nodded, then added, "And our own." She went pale. "You think they're going to make a move?" "Maybe," he said. "Maybe they already did." 2 days later, he got a call from an old contact in Newark, Nicky the banker. Guy ran money for the Genovese crew and kept an ear on everything. Nicky's voice was low and strained. "They're talking, Sal. You didn't hear it from me, but there's chatter. Tony doesn't like the spotlight, neither does Russell. I've said nothing. Don't matter. They're saying you're unstable, that you might flip. You know how this goes." "Yeah," Sal said quietly. "I know. They gave you a job. You did it. But now, you're a problem." Sal didn't reply. "They want to clean it up before it gets messy." That night, Sal didn't sleep at all. He sat in the chair by the window, gun on the table, staring at the front door. By the end of the week, he started seeing cars that didn't belong. A black Cadillac parked 2 blocks down, lights off. A man across the street pretending to fix a radio. Same guy 3 nights in a row. He couldn't tell if it was feds or the mob, or both. He tried calling Chucky, number disconnected. He tried calling another guy from the old Teamsters hall. No answer. Then, one afternoon, he turned on the TV and saw his own face flash across the screen. Authorities are now pursuing new leads in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. One name that continues to surface is Salvatore Briguglio, known associate of Anthony Provenzano and suspected enforcer in several unsolved cases. He turned the volume down, sat in the silence. He could feel it now, the net tightening. That night he told Lena he had to go. "Where?" she asked. "I don't know." She didn't cry, just nodded, went to the closet, pulled out a black duffel bag she kept for emergencies. Inside was 2,000 in small bills, a passport with a fake name, and an unregistered .32 snub. I always knew the day would come, she said. Sal took the bag and looked at her. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't come back. He paused at the door. Lena, go, she said, before they knock. And just like that, Salvatore Briguglio vanished. No airport records, no bus tickets, no witnesses. He stepped into the shadows and didn't leave a footprint behind. Some say he made it to Canada. Some say he was buried under a bridge in Jersey. Others believe he never left Detroit at all, that the same people who ordered him to kill Hoffa silenced him the same way, just days later. But Lena, she never told. And as far as the world was concerned, the man who helped make Hoffa disappear had finally followed him into the dark. The morning Salvatore Briguglio vanished, the world didn't stop turning. But the air felt different. At the FBI field office in Detroit, Special Agent Michael Krantz stood staring at a wall covered in photos, maps, timelines, and names, all tangled together with pins and string like some giant spider web. In the center of it, under a headline that read, Operation Hoffa, were two faces, James R. Hoffa and Salvatore Sally Bugs Briguglio. Where the hell is he? Krantz muttered. The office behind him buzzed with noise, phones ringing, typewriters clacking, agents arguing over leads that went nowhere. The Hoffa case had gone national in under 72 hours, and by the end of the week, it was an obsession. News anchors were spinning conspiracy theories, union officials were stonewalling, politicians were calling for blood. But the truth was simpler. Someone had made Hoffa disappear, and that someone, or at least one of them, was gone too. Salvatore Briguglio, Krantz told his team in a morning briefing, was spotted last week near Bloomfield Township. Since then, not a single trace. No credit cards, no car rentals, no confirmed sightings. He either slipped through the cracks, he paused, tapping the side of the table, or someone closed the book on him. The agents around him shifted in their chairs. No one said it, but they all knew. In mob cases, people didn't retire. They got erased. They hit all the usual spots first. They knocked on Chucky O'Brien's door again. Chucky looked thinner, twitchier than before, sweating through his undershirt even with the AC on. I told you, he said, eyes bloodshot. I haven't seen Sal. You two were tight, Krantz pressed. We were. I don't know where he is now. Did you help him get out? Chucky's face twisted. No, and if you're looking for him, maybe ask the guys in New Jersey. Or better yet, the guys above them. Krantz leaned in. You mean Provenzano? Chucky didn't answer, just looked away. Back in Newark, the FBI dragged in Tony Provenzano, Tony Pro, for questioning. They knew it was mostly theater. Tony never cracked. He'd smiled through murder charges, extortion raps, even RICO threats. Still, they had to go through the motions. Tony sat at the end of a polished table, his hands folded, wearing a tailored suit and the bored expression of a man who'd seen this movie too many times. You want me to say I know where Sal is? He said. I don't. He hasn't checked in. And Hoffa? Tony raised an eyebrow. Still missing last I checked. You gave the order, Krantz said. Tony laughed. What order? You hear it on a wire? You got it written down? Don't come at me with speculation, Agent. I run a legitimate business. I'm a Teamster, for Christ's sake. Krantz slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos, surveillance stills, Sal with Chucky, Sal near the Red Fox, Sal getting into a car that vanished off the grid. Sal Briguglio disappears the same week Hoffa does, Krantz said. That's not coincidence. That's cleanup. Tony looked at the photos, unfazed. You ever think maybe he just skipped town? You boys been breathing down his neck for years. Can't blame him for ducking. He skipped town with no money trail, no contact, no backup. Tony leaned back in his chair. Sometimes ghosts just get tired of haunting the same old place. By the end of the week, there were 12 agents assigned to tracing Sal. They tapped phones in Jersey, tracked movement at every known Genovese crew hangout, and flipped 3 low-level bookies in Pennsylvania who claimed to have heard Sal was headed north. One said Canada, another said Vermont. A third swore he saw Sal crossing the border into Montreal with a priest's ID and a fake beard. Krantz didn't believe any of them. Too clean, he said. Too easy. Because here's the thing, Sal wasn't the kind of man who ran. He was the guy they called when someone else had run. He was the ghost, which made his absence even more unsettling. It meant one of two things. Either someone had finally gotten to Sally Bugs, or he knew the storm was coming and disappeared on his own terms. But then something strange happened. On August 14th, a letter arrived at the Detroit FBI office. No return address, no fingerprints, just a plain envelope, postmarked from upstate New York. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Typed. You're looking in the wrong direction. He didn't go far. He's closer than you think. And he's not afraid. He's just waiting for the noise to die. When the dust settles, he'll speak. Until then, keep guessing. A friend. The room went silent when Krantz read it. Is this him? An agent asked. Maybe. Or a decoy? Also possible. They ran the typeface, analyzed the ink, checked every shred for DNA. Nothing, no matches, no leads, no fingerprints. Just a phantom voice telling them what they already feared. They weren't in control. And in the shadows of that chaos, the underworld began to fracture. In Newark, Nicky the banker disappeared 2 nights after making another quiet call to a Fed. They found his body in the trunk of a Buick, throat slit, money stuffed in his mouth like a warning. In Detroit, a former union organizer who claimed he knew what really happened to Hoffa got into a bar fight and fell down a flight of stairs, died instantly. And one by one, people who had even whispered Salvatore's name began walking with their heads down, checking behind them twice. The streets were closing. Not just for Sal, for everyone. Back in Jersey, a retired mob associate, an old cleaner named Louis Bagels, came forward in private, met with Krantz behind closed doors in a church basement. I don't know where he is, Louis said, but I know how this goes. Tell me, when you're the guy who does the dirtiest work, you don't get to live long after retirement. You get one of 2 endings. Either they bury you in the Pine Barrens, or they help you disappear, on the condition you never ever open your mouth again. And Sal? Louis smiled. Sal was smart, smarter than most gave him credit for. If anyone had a get-out plan, it was him. You think he's alive? Louis shrugged. I think he's watching, from a distance, waiting to see how the story ends. But Krantz wasn't the only one hunting shadows. The mob was moving too. A source inside the FBI, a clerk who owed Tony Pro favors, leaked that the feds were close to flipping a witness in Philly, someone who could connect Sal directly to the cleanup crew. A week later, that witness was found in a motel bathtub, wrists slit, room scrubbed, no fingerprints, no blood spatter, clean, almost surgical, just like Sal would have done it, which raised a chilling possibility. Was Sal cleaning up his own mess from the outside? In October, Lena received a letter. It wasn't signed, but she knew the handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. Thank you for not asking where I went. And tucked behind the paper, folded into it, was a photo. A snowy mountain cabin, trees, no people, just the faint impression of smoke curling out of a chimney. He was out there, somewhere, not dead, not buried, just quiet. And in that silence, Salvatore Briguglio became something else, a ghost, a myth, a name whispered between cops and killers, between agents and gangsters. No one ever confirmed if he was dead or alive. No grave, no body, no bones. But everyone who was there that summer would tell you the same thing. The day Hoffa disappeared, Sal disappeared too. It had been 83 days since Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, 72 since Salvatore Briguglio followed. To the public, the story was fading, drowned out by fresh scandals, war reports from overseas, and a new president posturing on TV. But behind closed doors, in the smoky war rooms of the FBI, in the padded booths of Italian restaurants in Jersey, and in the union halls that still carried Hoffa's name like a curse, his absence still echoed. And Sal's? It was louder. Because everyone believed Hoffa was dead. But Sal, he was unconfirmed, unseen. And in this world, a man you couldn't confirm was a man you still had to fear. 300 miles north of Jersey, tucked deep in the Adirondack Mountains. There was a cabin that didn't exist on any map. No electricity, no phone line. Just timber, a fireplace, and a name that never showed up on lease documents. Vincent Russo. It was the alias Sal used once long ago when he needed to disappear for a week after a warehouse job turned bloody. He had paid cash for the land under another fake name, using a contact in Buffalo who owed him big. No one else knew about the place, not even Lena. The cabin sat half sunken into a pine forest, hidden from the road, camouflaged by trees and snow. From the outside, it looked abandoned, paint peeling, roof sloped. One window cracked, but inside, it was alive with silence. And Sal was there. He moved slow now. The stiffness in his joints had crept up in the cold, especially in the mornings. He kept the fire going day and night, splitting wood like it was a prayer. Swing, crack, breathe, again and again. There was no clock in the cabin, no radio, no calendar. Time didn't matter here. All that mattered was not being seen. He lived on canned food, dried meat, and powdered coffee. The water came from the stream behind the cabin. He boiled it twice, just to be sure. His beard had grown in full. His eyes were sunken, skin paler than he remembered. When he caught his reflection in the cabin's dusty mirror, he barely recognized the man looking back. Which was the point. He didn't speak. Not aloud. He hadn't heard another human voice in weeks. But the voices inside, those never left. The worst came at night. Sleep was rare, and when it came twisted. In his dreams, he stood in the woods, looking down at two holes in the snow. One was already filled, the other waited. Behind him, footsteps. He turned. It was Hoffa, dressed in his funeral suit, hands folded. "You did it, didn't you?" Hoffa said. Sal didn't answer. "You were supposed to be different," Hoffa whispered, and then the snow would turn red. Every night the same. But it wasn't just dreams that haunted him, it was the certainty that he wasn't alone. Twice in October, he spotted fresh boot prints outside the cabin. Not his, not animals. Heavy, wide, military tread. Once he found an empty cigarette pack tucked under the edge of a log, half buried in frost. He didn't smoke that brand. He watched the woods for hours, rifle in hand, eye to the scope. Nothing moved. But something was out there. He started sleeping during the day, staying up at night, gun across his chest, eyes scanning the windows. He'd made himself disappear, but the world hadn't stopped looking, and he didn't know who would find him first, the feds, the mob, or his own guilt. Meanwhile, back in New Jersey, Russell Bufalino, the quiet boss of Pennsylvania, had grown restless. He didn't speak much, but when he did, men listened. And that week, over espresso in a candlelit basement, he told Tony Provenzano, "We gave him time. Enough time." Tony didn't blink. Russell continued, "If he's still alive, he's a liability. If he's talking, we're already dead, so make sure he's not." Tony nodded. No argument, no questions. The order was clear. Find Sal. Or finish him. 2 days later, a black Lincoln with Vermont plates pulled into a town called Ticonderoga, the last real stop before the backwoods. 2 men got out, long coats, gloves, thick accents. They checked into a roadside motel, didn't ask for directions, didn't carry luggage. They didn't need to. They weren't staying. They were searching. Back in the cabin, Sal felt it before he saw it. He was chopping wood again, sleeves rolled up, breath fogging in the cold air. Then something shifted. A smell on the breeze. Cologne. Leather. Car exhaust. City smells. Wrong out here. He dropped the axe and moved to the tree line, staying low. In the distance, just at the bend of the snowy trail, he saw a glint of chrome, a bumper catching the light. The Lincoln. They'd found him. That night, he didn't sleep. He packed what little he had, 2 cans of beans, a flask of water, his old revolver, and a second passport tucked in a tin box under the floor. He wrote a note, not a confession, just a sentence. Let them believe what they want. He didn't sign it. He left the fire burning, placed the note on the table, and stepped into the woods under a silver moon. 3 days later, a hunter found the cabin empty. No blood, no struggle, no body. Just ashes in the fireplace, a coffee cup still warm, and that note pinned under a rock like it had something to say. The men in the Lincoln, they never checked in again. Their car was found burned out 30 miles south, near a ravine. No fingerprints, no bodies, no explanation, just smoke. And once again, Salvatore Briguglio had vanished without a trace. In the years that followed, his name turned into a ghost story. Cops said he was buried somewhere in Michigan. The mob said he crossed into Canada under a priest's robe. Some whispered he was in South America, working security for old Nazi bankers. Others claimed he became a fisherman in Alaska, never speaking, never blinking, just waiting for the sea to bury him. But Lena, she never believed he died. She kept the photo he'd sent her, the cabin in the snow, tucked behind the radio on her nightstand. And every winter when the wind howled and the snow began to fall, she'd stare at it for a long time. Because she knew, a man like Sal doesn't disappear. He just stops being seen. By 1977, the world had mostly moved on. Jimmy Hoffa had been gone nearly 2 years, declared legally dead. His family had fought and mourned. The Teamsters had reshaped their image, tried to bury the past under press releases and fresh leadership. America was spinning forward. New scandals, new wars, new monsters to chase. Watergate, gas lines, cults, disco. But in the quiet corners of law enforcement and in darker corners of the underworld, 2 names still echoed, Hoffa and Briguglio. And in both cases, what kept them alive wasn't proof of death, it was the lack of it. In Newark, Special Agent Michael Krantz sat in a darkened office littered with boxes marked Hoffa Case. Stale cigarette smoke hung in the air like fog that had forgotten to leave. His hair was thinner now, streaked with gray. His suits had lost their sharpness. He'd chased bank robbers, kidnappers, even a serial bomber up in Maine, but nothing haunted him like this case. Because Sal had done what no one ever managed to do under Krantz's watch, disappear without dying. He wasn't a ghost. Ghosts were easy. Ghosts had obituaries. Sal was something worse, an open question. Every time a new body turned up in the Pine Barrens or a river spit out a skeleton, Krantz waited for the call. Every anonymous tip, every "I saw him in Reno" or "he's living in Sicily under a new name," he took them all seriously. But nothing ever stuck. Until November 1977. The package arrived on a Monday. No return address, mailed to the FBI field office in Detroit. Inside the plain brown box was a cassette tape, a pair of worn leather gloves, and a handwritten note. "You stopped listening. Now you'll hear." The handwriting was jagged, slanted. Not Sal's, at least not according to the Bureau's handwriting expert. But the tape? That was different. They played it in a closed room, the kind used for informant interviews. Walls padded, one red light overhead, no windows. Krantz sat with 2 agents and a tech guy. The tape hissed, clicked, then began. There was silence at first, then breathing. Shallow, tired, maybe winded. Then footsteps on gravel or dry leaves, hard to tell. A voice came next, low, raspy, familiar. "If you're hearing this, it means they didn't find me. Or if they did, they didn't win." The room fell silent. Krantz leaned forward. The voice continued. "They wanted it clean. They always do. But it never is. Not really. You put a bullet in a man's head, you don't kill the truth. You just delay it. Buy it time." Jimmy didn't scream. He just looked at me like he already knew. That's what kills you, not the act, the eyes. They follow you. Another pause. The sound of wind. A long exhale. You think you're making history when you bury a legend, but all you're really doing is digging your own grave. I didn't run because I was scared. I ran because I knew they'd come next. The same guys who handed me the rope would hang me with it. You know the rules. So go ahead, keep chasing shadows, keep digging holes. Just remember, the deeper you dig, the closer you get to hell. Then silence. Then the sound of fire crackling, a match maybe striking wood. Then the click as the tape ended. The room stayed quiet for several seconds. Then one of the agents said, "That's him." The other nodded. "It sounds like it." Krantz didn't speak. He reached for a pen and wrote down just one word on a notepad. Alive. News of the tape never made it public. The Bureau kept it locked down, classified as unverified intelligence. But word traveled fast through the right or wrong channels. And within a week, the underworld started twitching again. Because if Sal was alive, he might talk. And if he talked, names would fall. Not street soldiers, bosses. In a restaurant basement in Brooklyn, Tony Provenzano sat across from Frank the Irishman Sheeran, big, old, stone-eyed. They hadn't spoken in a year. Tony broke the silence. "You hear the tape?" Frank nodded. Everybody did. "You think it's real?" Frank took a sip of whiskey. "I think it sounds like a man who knows too much to stay quiet forever." Tony leaned forward, whispering, "If he's out there, he needs to be silenced." Frank stared. "He already was." Tony frowned. "Not good enough. We gave him too much rope." Frank didn't blink. "Maybe he took it with him." Meanwhile, in upstate New York, a park ranger found something strange in the woods. Near the Canadian border and far from any known trail, he stumbled across the burned-out remains of a cabin. Not fully destroyed, just gutted. Roof collapsed, interior blackened. Inside, they found a tin box, mostly melted. In it, fragments of paper, film, and what looked like half a photograph, burnt at the edges. It showed a man's arm, part of his sleeve, and the edge of a cabin window. The FBI ran it for prints, no match. They tested the ash for DNA. The heat had destroyed everything. But Krantz believed it was the cabin Sal had used. He'd been that close. Weeks passed, then months. No more tapes, no new leads. Until a cold spring morning in 1978, when Lena walked into a post office in Patterson and found a postcard in her box. It was blank except for a single phrase written on the back in blue ink. "Even ghosts get tired." There was no signature, but she knew. She walked home slowly that day, staring at the card the whole time. The words were like an echo, faint but sharp. She'd moved on, mostly, kept to herself. No one had ever questioned her. She kept Sal's secret tucked behind her ribs like a second heart. She poured a drink, lit a cigarette, and sat down with the postcard in her lap. If he was still alive, it meant he hadn't found peace. And if he wasn't, then this was his goodbye. Either way, the world would never see Salvatore Briguglio again. But the world wouldn't forget him either. In 1980, a mob informant named Carmine Romano testified in open court that Sally Bugs had been involved in at least 15 clean jobs, including, he hinted, Hoffa's final ride. The courtroom buzzed. The newspapers ran with it. But still, no body, no photo, no trace, just stories. Years later, when Krantz finally retired, he kept the original cassette tape in a locked drawer at home. He played it once a year, on July 30th, with a glass of bourbon in hand. The voice never aged. The message never changed. Sal had vanished. And in doing so, he'd become something more powerful than feared. He became unsolved. It was August 1991, and Newark was sweating. Not just from the heat, though the humidity hung in the air like a punishment, but from the nervous energy that came whenever city crews dug too deep into places the old mob had forgotten. They were working on a repaving project, tearing up an old stretch of sidewalk behind an abandoned Teamsters hall not far from Raymond Boulevard. The hall had been shut down years ago, boarded up, left to rot. Now, the city wanted it gone. Clean slate, new condos. The jackhammers started at 7:15 a.m. At 7:42, they stopped. The foreman leaned down and tapped the ground with his boot. Something hollow, not dirt, not pipe, metal. A few more careful strikes with a spade revealed the edge of a corroded suitcase buried under nearly 2 feet of concrete. The site went quiet. No one said it out loud, but they all thought the same thing. This wasn't supposed to be here. The police were called, then the FBI. then the crime scene unit. By noon, a perimeter had been set. Cameras were up. Suits had shown. The suitcase, now gently unearthed, sat in a clear evidence container like a bomb waiting to go off. It was old, beaten, leather, mostly rotted, but still sealed with twin steel latches, rusted shut. Inside were 3 items. 1. A cracked black and white photograph, water-stained, folded twice. 2. A pair of black leather gloves, worn but clean. 3. A small cassette tape labeled in red marker, for the right ears only. When the photo was cleaned and examined, it showed 3 men standing near a Cadillac. One was clearly Jimmy Hoffa. Another, grainy but unmistakable, Salvatore Briguglio. The third man's face had been scratched out, intentionally. Deep gouges through the film's emulsion, but it wasn't the faces that startled the agents. It was the location. Behind them, a wooden cabin, half shadowed by trees. A cabin that looked strikingly similar to the one Krantz had seen in those burned fragments from the Adirondacks years ago. He leaned in and whispered, "Son of a bitch!" The gloves were bagged and tested. Old-school black lambskin, mob issue, nothing identifying. No prints, no initials. But it was the tape that shook the room. In a sound lab buried beneath the Bureau's New Jersey field office, they played it for the first time. The audio hissed, then static, then a voice, deeper, slower, older. "You kept looking. That's good. Means you're still afraid." There was a pause, wind or breathing. "Some people dig graves, some plant seeds. You never know which until something grows." A slow chuckle, dry, cracking. This place, this cabin, it wasn't always safe. Not for me, not for Jimmy, not for the other guy. He thought he was smart, smarter than me, smarter than Tony. Thought he could play both sides, thought silence bought him mercy. Another pause. It didn't. I buried him before winter came, right next to the well. He didn't scream either. The voice cracked again, then softened. "You won't find me? Not unless I want you to. I'm not missing, I'm just done talking." Click. The room sat in stunned silence. An agent finally spoke. "Is it real?" Another said. "It's too theatrical." Krantz? He said nothing, just stared at the gloves, the photo, the cassette player. He'd spent over a decade chasing Sal's ghost. Every clue led deeper into smoke. Every path circled back to silence. But this felt like a goodbye. Or worse, a trap. 2 weeks later, the Bureau sent a team upstate. The plan was simple. Locate the well the voice had mentioned. Cross-reference the cabin's position in the photo. Bring cadaver dogs. Dig deep. They searched for 6 days. Found nothing. No cabin. No well. No body. Just trees and snow and history fading into moss. But across the river, in Brooklyn, the suitcase triggered a different kind of panic. The Genovese crew, what remained of it, had mostly moved into white-collar rackets by '91. Real estate scams, port manipulation, union consulting. The golden era of blood and concrete was over. But there were still old-timers who remembered, men who had sat beside Hoffa, men who had whispered orders to Sal. And now, with the tape out, they were nervous. Because if Sal was alive, or if someone was pretending to be him, then someone still had dirt. And dirt, left unburied, becomes blackmail. At a social club in Bensonhurst, 3 retired captains met behind closed doors. They played the tape. One called it bullshit. Another said it was him. The third just sat back and muttered, "Either way, it's unfinished business." They made one call to a fixer known as the accountant. He didn't carry guns. He carried lists and burner cash and silencers. Not the kind you attach to pistols, but the kind that make people disappear with paper trails and fake suicides. His orders were clear. Find out who made the tape, and if it's him, make sure it's his last. Meanwhile, Krantz visited Lena. First time in over a decade. She was older now. Lines in her face, slower with her words, but sharp. Always sharp. He showed her the photo from the suitcase. She didn't look at it. Then he played the tape. When the voice came on, Her hands trembled slightly, just once, then went still again. When it ended, she lit a cigarette and stared at him. He said he'd never talk. Maybe he changed his mind. He didn't. You're sure it's not him? I'm sure. Krantz leaned forward. Then who the hell is it? She blew smoke through her nose and said quietly, Someone wants you chasing shadows again. And that was the part that kept Krantz up at night, because for all the years he'd spent chasing Sal, there was one possibility he hadn't prepared for. What if Sal was dead, but someone was using his legend to stir the pot? And worse, what if they were better at it than he ever was? Back in the evidence locker, the suitcase sat untouched, sealed now, archived, but even sealed, it whispered, to agents, to bosses, to the streets. It said, the story isn't over. Because the thing about men like Salvatore Briguglio, even when they vanish, they don't really leave. They linger. In tape. In rumors. In the silence between knock and answer. And somewhere out there, in the cold, dark corners of the world, a cabin stood, empty, but not forgotten. It was supposed to be a routine trial, another RICO case, this time built against what was left of the Provenzano crew, decades after their heyday. Most of the heavy hitters were dead. Some had flipped. Others had disappeared, just like Sal. But the government had spent 4 years building this one. It wasn't about violence anymore. It was about legacy. About saying, we still remember what you did, even if no one else does. They called it Operation Rust, because all that was left of the old crew were corroded men held together by routine, oxygen tanks, and stubborn silence. The courtroom was packed. Media showed up expecting little more than weak memories and aging mobsters mumbling through depositions. But on day 6, something unexpected happened. A name was added to the witness list, hand-delivered in an unmarked envelope and slipped into the lead prosecutor's briefcase. One name. No explanation. Just 3 words typed neatly. Vincent Russo. Cabin. The prosecutor, Janet Markell, froze when she read it. She'd been on the case since the first indictment. She knew every associate, every drop spot, every warehouse turned into a graveyard. But she didn't know that name, at least not officially. Vincent Russo was an alias the Bureau had flagged years ago, suspected to be used by Salvatore Briguglio during his final days before vanishing. But there was no confirmation, no paper trail, no fingerprints. Just whispers in that cabin in the woods. And now, someone had added the name to a live federal trial as a witness. Someone was calling back the ghost. Is this a prank? One of the agents asked. Could be a trap, another added. Markell didn't care. She signed the subpoena herself. They traced the contact to a safe house in Virginia, where a federal witness under protection had requested a live testimony slot. His name, Louis Gloves Falco, thought to be dead since 1984. The next morning, courtroom 17 ID was electric. Louis Falco walked in slowly, wearing a gray suit, cane tapping with each step, oxygen tube trailing from his nose. But his eyes, they were still sharp. Like he'd spent the last 40 years watching, remembering, cataloging. The defense team squirmed in their seats. Half of them thought Falco was dead. The other half hoped he was. Markell approached slowly. Mr. Falco, can you tell the court where you've been since 1984? Alive, he croaked, cracking a bitter smile. That's all that matters. And why are you testifying now? He cleared his throat. Because I'm dying for real this time. And because there's one last debt I owe. The room fell silent. Markell took a breath. To who? Falco looked around the courtroom, eyes scanning every old man in a tailored suit, every fed in the back row, and finally the judge. Then he said it. Salvatore Briguglio. The room erupted, chairs shifted, reporters scrambled. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Order in this courtroom! Markell leaned forward. Mr. Falco, you're saying Salvatore Briguglio, the man suspected in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa, is alive. Falco chuckled softly. He was. And he told me exactly why he vanished. Falco's testimony unfolded like a confession, not of guilt, but of survival. He said in late 1977 he'd been ordered to clean up a loose end in the Catskills. He expected it to be another snitch, another body in a shallow grave. But when he arrived at the site, he found a cabin, and inside the cabin, a man with a gun and a tape recorder. That man was Sal. He looked different, Falco said. Thinner. Eyes like he hadn't slept in a year. But he wasn't scared. He was ready. What did he say? Markel asked. He said, "They sent you to kill me, didn't they?" And you replied? I said, "Yeah." The courtroom was dead silent. But he didn't raise the gun. He didn't flinch. He just said, "Then let's talk first." And he poured me a drink. They spoke for 6 hours, according to Falco. Sal laid it all out. How the hit on Hoffa was greenlit not just by Tony Provenzano, but by higher-ups in multiple families. How Sal had been chosen not just because he could do it, but because he'd keep quiet. But he knew the clock was ticking, Falco said. Once Hoffa was gone, the next body was going to be his. So he vanished, but not without a plan. Sal made recordings, Falco continued. Letters, a full insurance file, just in case someone ever tried to rewrite the story. "And where are those files now?" Markel pressed. Falco smiled. He said they'd surface when they needed to. "And did you kill him that day?" "No." Falco's eyes softened. "I faked it," gasps rippled across the room. "I made it look like he died in a fire, burned the cabin, left a body from another job and close match. It worked. Everybody bought it. Even the feds." "And what happened to Sal?" "He walked out into the snow, said he was going north. That was the last I ever saw him." The defense team objected immediately. "Hearsay, fabricated. This man's been off the grid for decades." But the judge allowed the testimony to stand. And the next morning, the trial shifted, not just toward RICO charges, but toward conspiracy to eliminate a witness, a man the court now acknowledged might have faked his own death to escape the very courtroom they now sat in. Outside the courthouse, cameras went wild. CNN, 60 Minutes, Dateline, they all ran with it. Is Sal Briguglio still alive? Ghost of Hoffa case returns. Witness says mob cleaner faked own death. Old detectives were dragged out of retirement. Hoffa's son gave a press statement. Lena, quietly watching from her apartment, turned off the TV halfway through and muttered, "They're still trying to bury him." But not everyone believed Falco. Agent Krantz, now retired, watched from home with a drink in hand. He's lying, he told himself. But deep down, something twisted in his gut, because Falco knew too much. And that part about the recordings, that was real, because they had already heard 2 of them. And if there were more, then this wasn't just about history. It was about control. Who gets to tell the story? Who gets to own the truth? 3 days after Falco's testimony, the courthouse received another envelope. No return address. Inside, a cassette, labeled in red marker, "The tape you missed." The envelope arrived quietly, the way all important things do. No signature, no fingerprints, no stamp that could be traced. Just a plain, manila envelope, hand-delivered to a sleepy courthouse clerk in the dead middle of a Tuesday afternoon. By the time the envelope reached Prosecutor Janet Markel's desk, half the staff had already clocked out for lunch. She opened it with a letter opener, careful, like it might be rigged. Inside was a single cassette tape, labeled in red block letters, "The tape you missed." There was no note, no sender, no threat, just the tape, like it had been waiting patiently all these years for its turn to speak. Markel stared at it for a long time before she moved. She didn't call a meeting. She didn't tell the judge. She didn't notify the press. She took it to the courthouse's AV room, sat down alone, and fed the tape into an ancient player that smelled like dust and regret. The machine clicked, then hissed. Then the voice came through. This voice wasn't the same as the others, not exactly. It was still low, still deliberate, but sharper now, cleaner, not broken by years of hiding, not cracked by fear or insomnia. This was a man in control, a man ready. You think you've got it figured out, the trial, the story, the sides, but you don't. You've been watching a movie without realizing the reel's been flipped halfway through. That guy in court, Louis Gloves, he's not lying. But he's not telling the full truth either. Markel leaned in. The voice continued. He didn't save me. He was there to kill me, just like they sent him to. And I let him think he could walk away alive if he listened. But I already had my exit. The cabin wasn't the plan, it was the test. And he failed it. There was a pause. Soft wind filtered through the background of the recording. He left thinking I was heading north. I wasn't. I was heading back. Markel's eyes narrowed. She paused the tape, rewound. I was heading back. Back where? Back to Jersey. Back to Hoffa? She hit play again. You always think the first cut is the deepest, the act itself, the moment you pull the trigger or wrap the wire. But it's the aftermath that kills you, the silence after the storm. They thought they could erase me the way I erased others. But they forgot who taught them the game. Another pause, this time longer. The tape hissed as if it had run out, and then suddenly, a voice returned. A different voice, angrier, scratchier, unmistakably Tony Provenzano. We gave you the job because you were supposed to shut the fuck up, Sal, not record goddamn confessions. Markel's breath caught. It wasn't just Sal's voice anymore. It was a conversation, a wire, a setup. Tony again. I buried more problems than you even knew existed. You want to start talking? Fine. But you go down first. Then Sal again, calm, almost amused. If I go down, I'm dragging you with me. Then a bang, a slap maybe. Then silence. Then Sal, alone again. There's always someone listening. The tape ended with the sound of a door shutting, then nothing. Markel sat there in the dark for a full minute. Her heart was hammering. That wasn't just a confession. That was a recorded conversation with a mob boss. Proof, long denied, that Tony Provenzano, the man the government had spent years trying to connect directly to Hoffa's disappearance, had talked to Sal about the hit and about keeping it quiet. And somehow, this tape had survived. She didn't wait. She called Agent Harold Dyson, the new head of organized crime at the Bureau. Get a secure team. We need to verify this tape, and we need to bring Provenzano in, now. Dyson's voice was grave. If this is real, it is. Silence on the line. Then everything changes. That night, the FBI raided 3 properties tied to Provenzano's old lieutenants. They didn't find Tony. He'd died in prison in 1988. But they found boxes, old bank statements, falsified union travel logs, 2 ledgers with handwritten notes. One of them simply read, S.B., Russo, Red Cabin, Burn. It wasn't confirmation, but it was smoke. And behind smoke, there's always fire. The next morning, Krantz called Markel. He was on his 3rd cup of coffee and had replayed the tape 6 times since someone anonymously sent him a digital copy. You know what this means, don't you? Markel was quiet. It means we were chasing shadows for 20 years. Krantz exhaled. It means the shadows were chasing us back. 3 days later, another name resurfaced. The 3rd man in the old photo, the one with the face scratched out. After scanning and reprocessing the image with new software, facial recognition pulled a 67% match. A name, Joseph Zerilli. A boss, Detroit. A ghost who died in 1977. But the photo, according to experts, was taken in late 75 or early 76, based on the make of the Cadillac and the wear on the snow tires, which meant Zerilli had been present, which meant Detroit had signed off, which meant Hoffa never stood a chance. Markel gathered the evidence, the tape, the photo, the testimony, the ledgers. She brought it to the Justice Department, asked for a full reopening of the Hoffa case. They reviewed it, sat on it, then quietly shut it down. Official reason: no living suspects, no prosecutable angle. Unofficial reason: too many ghosts, too few bodies. But the public didn't forget. The press caught wind of the tape. The headlines exploded again. Lost tape ties Mafia to Hoffa hit. Ghost voice returns to haunt mob legends. FBI shuts case despite new evidence. And somewhere, in some room no one could see, another tape was being recorded. Because now the world was listening again. And for the first time in years, Lena smiled. She sat in her apartment, the postcard still on her dresser, the radio playing low, and whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" Because Sal never really disappeared. He just waited, until the world forgot what silence sounded like. In early spring of 1992, a retired cameraman named Cliff Malloy was cleaning out his garage in Livonia, Michigan, when he came across a rusted metal box beneath an old snowblower and 2 boxes of expired film stock. Inside, buried in dust, was a 16mm film reel, labeled in faded ink, 7/29/75, Red Fox, Test Shots, Studio 2. Cliff was 71 now, sharp but slower. He'd worked 2 decades with WXYZ TV in Detroit, mostly did crime scene coverage, press conferences, ribbon cuttings. He wasn't the flashy guy. He just rolled the camera, framed the shot, and let the reporters do the talking. He almost threw the reel out, but something about the date gave him pause. July 29th, 1975. The day before, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. Cliff hadn't thought about that day in years, but now, the memories returned like a cracked dam flooding fast. A producer had sent him out to scout B-roll footage near the Machis Red Fox restaurant. Something about a segment they were prepping on union politics. Shoot the lot, the sign, a few walk-bys, they told him. He remembered the day being hot, quiet, nothing special. But what if he missed something? What if the camera didn't? The next morning, Cliff packed the reel into a cooler lined with bubble wrap, got in his truck, and drove 2 hours to the nearest lab that still handled 16mm film. "Rush it," he told the technician. "On my dime." The man gave him a skeptical look. "You really think there's anything on this?" Cliff tapped the box. "If there is, it'll be history." 2 days later, he got the call. "You need to come down here." He drove straight over, heart thudding like a slow drum. The technician greeted him with wide eyes and the kind of quiet that said, "We found something, and we don't know what to do with it." In a dark projection room, they ran the reel. It started as expected. Shaky shots of the parking lot, slow pan over the front entrance of the Machis Red Fox, a couple of cars passing, an old man sweeping a sidewalk. But at timestamp 80:38, the frame shifted slightly. To the far left of the image, just past the main lot, a dark Ford Torino idled, engine running. In the front seat, a man in a gray suit, window half down, face angled toward the entrance. And for 2 full seconds, as Cliff adjusted his zoom and focus, the man in the car turned and looked straight into the lens. It was blurry, but it was him, Salvatore "Sally Bugs" Briguglio. Cliff froze. Even decades later, he knew that face. He'd seen it on Most Wanted posters, on 60-minute specials, on FBI reports in every major documentary about Hoffa. But this wasn't a mugshot. This wasn't a posed photo. This was real footage. Unstaged. Sal sitting in a car outside the restaurant where Hoffa would vanish the next day, looking directly at the man holding the camera, looking directly at him. Cliff didn't waste time. He called a contact at the Detroit Free Press, who called a producer at CBS, who called the FBI. By that afternoon, the reel was in the hands of Agent Harold Dyson, who drove 3 hours personally to retrieve it. They watched it 5 times in the evidence room. The facial match came back at 94%. "God damn it," Dyson muttered. He was there. He was watching. One agent asked the obvious. Why wasn't this seen before? Because no one had thought to look. The footage had never been logged. The segment it was shot for was killed before it aired. The film was tossed into Cliff's personal archive, buried under years of forgotten reels, gathering dust in a Michigan garage. Until now. But that wasn't all. Dyson took a still from the reel, Sal's face, eyes locked on the camera, and ran it through visual tracking software to isolate his gaze, line of sight, and head angle. Then he cross-referenced it with newly reanalyzed FBI surveillance logs from the day Hoffa vanished, July 30th, 1975. Those logs placed Sal nowhere near the Red Fox, officially. But the footage said otherwise. Not only was he nearby the day before, but he had visual confirmation of Hoffa's arrival route, parking habits, and likely routines. He'd been casing the location. That meant one thing: premeditation. The Bureau added the film to their classified Hoffa file. It was their first visual confirmation of Sal in proximity to Hoffa within 24 hours of the disappearance. No more hearsay. No more maybe. This was evidence, and the timing couldn't have been more volatile, because a week earlier, that tape from Sal had surfaced. And now, they had a matching timeline. The press was kept out, temporarily, but the news leaked. It always does. First, a whisper in a union bar, then a note in a journalist's notebook, then a quick 12-second segment on the evening news. New evidence ties known mob enforcer Salvatore Briguglio to the Red Fox restaurant within 24 hours of Hoffa's disappearance. And just like that, the ghost had a shadow again. Back in Newark, a man named Dominic D'Angelo watched the broadcast from his nursing home bed. He was 85. Frail but lucid. He used to run loans and messages for the Genovese crew in the 1960s. Nothing heavy, just errands. But he'd once driven Sal from a train station in Jersey to a safe house near Newark. He remembered Sal sweating in the back seat, quiet, focused, wired too tight to be clean. Now, watching the footage on TV, Dominic mumbled, "That bastard never stopped moving." He reached for the phone and called a number he hadn't used in 20 years. "Yeah," a voice said. "It's Dom," he wheezed. "It's time." "Time for what?" "I saw him again." "You saw Sal?" "Not saw. He saw me, in the tape. Watch close. Watch real close." Click. The next day, the FBI reanalyzed the video again. This time, zoomed in on the reflection in the passenger side window of Sal's car. It was faint, wavy, almost invisible. But with enhanced contrast and digital sharpening, they saw it. A figure walking toward the restaurant. Hoffa. Not in clear detail, just a shape, a stride, a familiar silhouette, but distinct. Sal had been watching him, and he'd seen the approach before it ever happened. The agents were stunned. Krantz, who had come out of retirement to consult, said only, "That wasn't surveillance, that was staging." The footage triggered a federal review. Cold cases were reopened, warrants were dusted off. And finally, quietly, a judge signed an order to exhume an unmarked grave in a private burial plot in northern New Jersey, based on a long-dismissed anonymous letter from 1983. The letter had said, "Check the one buried as John Leone. The teeth don't match the name." No one had followed up. Now, they would. Because maybe, just maybe, the grave didn't hold a nobody. Maybe it held the body that burned in the cabin. Maybe it was Louis Falco's cover-up. Maybe Sal had bought his life by stealing someone else's death. In the meantime, the film was archived under the case file. Briguglio, Salvatore, visual evidence, Water 03, pre-Hoffa casing, 7.975. But the real label, the one Cliff scribbled in Sharpie on his own copy, it read, "The moment he looked back." Because Cliff always swore that Sal didn't just glance at the camera, he knew it was there. He looked into it, as if to say, "You're going to spend the rest of your life wondering." The grave sat in a private cemetery outside Parsippany, New Jersey, tucked behind a long-shuttered convent where the nuns had stopped singing decades ago. The trees had grown over the stone path. The iron gate had rusted, and the markers had started to lean, like even the dead were tired of waiting. Plot C-23 had no headstone, just a thin, crumbling marker that read, "John Leone, 1977. But John Leone didn't exist. Not in any DMV, not in hospital records, not in baptism registries, and definitely not in the Social Security database. He was a name invented on a typewriter and buried under 6 feet of indifference. The only reason the FBI found him was because of an anonymous letter mailed in 1983 to a defunct Newark news outlet. Back then, no one listened. Now, they were bringing shovels. It was early morning when the FBI, accompanied by a forensics team, arrived with a quiet convoy of unmarked cars and a backhoe wrapped in white tarp. No media, no announcements, no cameras. This was the kind of work done in silence, digging into the past with fingers crossed and breath held. Agent Harold Dyson stood off to the side, arms folded, coat collar up against the wind. Next to him stood Janet Markell, her face pale in the gray light, holding a manila folder with Sal's last known dental chart and x-ray scans. A crime scene tech leaned over. "You think he's really in there?" Dyson didn't answer, because he didn't know if he wanted Sal dead or Sal missing. At 7:54 a.m., the backhoe stopped. A coffin, wooden, warped, and water-stained, emerged like a secret crawling back into daylight. The smell hit first, then the weight of it all. They pried the lid open slowly, careful not to crack what time had already hollowed. Inside lay a man's body, bones intact, flesh long decayed, wrapped in a black suit now eaten by rot and mold. No wallet, no ID, just a single silver ring on the left pinky finger. And that's when Markell's stomach flipped, because the ring was engraved, SB. Bag it, scan it, match it. The order was sharp. From Dyson, the techs moved fast. A mobile lab was already on site. Within an hour, they had dental impressions, bone samples, DNA swabs, and a scan of the skull ready to run against everything in the Salvatore Briguglio file. Markell stood behind them, barely breathing. If this was Sal, then the mystery could finally end. If this wasn't Sal, then the mystery was only deepening. By 3:10 p.m., the results came back. Partial DNA match, enough to prove relation, but not identity. The man in the grave shared familial DNA markers with Sal, cousin, perhaps, maybe a brother. But not Salvatore Briguglio, not even close. The room fell silent. Markell closed the folder and stepped outside the tent. Dyson followed. "You were hoping it was him?" he asked. "I was hoping it was over," she replied. But the findings raised a new question. If the body was a relative of Sal's, and Sal burned a cabin to fake his death, had he used a family member to do it? Had he murdered someone from his own bloodline to vanish? Or had someone else planted the body to frame Sal's disappearance? Either way, the unmarked grave wasn't a burial. It was a message. The ring, the initials, the choice of cemetery. It was bait for the FBI, for the mob, for anyone watching. Sal had known they'd dig eventually, and when they did, he wanted them to find almost the truth. Later that night, in a hotel room back in Newark, Dyson replayed one of Sal's old cassette tapes, the line that haunted him most. "You always think the first cut is the deepest, but it's the aftermath that kills you." He rewound it again, hit play, listened, then stared at the autopsy photo of the man in the grave. He circled the ring on the report and wrote one word beneath it: staged. The next day, Markell got an envelope, delivered by hand. No postmark, no fingerprints. Inside was a single Polaroid photo, aged and curling at the corners. It showed a man's back, standing in a field, facing a cabin. The angle was over the shoulder, like someone had followed him, snapped the photo quietly. The man was wearing a gray coat. On his left hand, a silver ring. SB. But the handwriting on the back of the photo was what made her fingers freeze. "You opened the wrong grave." Within 24 hours, Markell and Dyson met with the Justice Department and requested full reclassification of the Briguglio file. Everything they thought they knew was now suspect. All prior death assumptions were invalid. All remains previously connected were in question. Sal wasn't just missing again. He was now, officially. Status, unconfirmed, high probability operational. But operational where? How? He would be in his 70s by now, and yet every clue, every tape, every movement felt recent, clean, sharp. It didn't feel like a trail from a dying man. It felt like a game board still in play. Meanwhile, in a cabin deep in the woods near Lake Placid, an old man watched the news. He had no electricity, only a solar-powered radio and a dusty black and white TV that worked when the weather cooperated. He fed wood into a stove, stirred a pot of soup, and looked at the silver ring on his hand. Still fit, still sharp. He smiled, because the dig had gone exactly as planned. He'd picked that grave for a reason. He'd left the ring where it could be found. He'd made sure the body couldn't talk, not even in DNA, because sometimes the best way to be found is to let them think they almost have you. The first real clue came from a border control logbook, yellowed with age, half water damaged, and almost lost in a warehouse fire in 1996. An intern named Amy from the Department of Homeland Security had stumbled on it while cross-referencing 1970s traffic through the Champlain-Saint-Bernard-de-l'École border crossing into Quebec. Buried on page 143 was a name that didn't raise alarms on its own. Raymond DeLiesel, union transport representative affiliated with Teamsters, local 631 vehicle plate, New Jersey, date of crossing August 4th, 1977. Passenger listed as Vincent Russo, the alias known only to a few agents and one woman named Lena, the same name Salvatore Briguglio had reportedly used when he vanished. When Agent Dyson got the call, he was silent for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "Find DeLiesel." 3 days later, they did. He was living in a rundown log home near Val-d'Or, Quebec, a mining town 4 hours northwest of Montreal, surrounded by pine trees, frozen lakes, and forgotten sins. His real name wasn't DeLiesel anymore. Now he went by Richard Plant, a soft-spoken retiree who sold bait out of his shed and fixed broken outboards for beer money. He had a Canadian passport, a voter registration, a history. But none of it existed before 1978. Dyson and Janet Markell arrived just after dawn, unmarked car crunching across gravel, their breath clouding in the crisp northern air. DeLiesel opened the door before they even knocked. "FBI?" he asked, not surprised. Markell nodded. "You know why we're here?" He nodded back. "You're late." Inside, the cabin smelled like oil and wood shavings. A small wood stove hissed in the corner. The walls were cluttered with rusted tools, curled newspapers, and yellowing photos of men standing beside trucks. They sat at a dented metal table. He poured black coffee into chipped mugs and drank first. Then he said, "You're not hunting a man. You're walking into his trap." Dyson narrowed his eyes. "Sal?" DeLiesel nodded. Markell leaned in. "You helped him cross." "No," DeLiesel said calmly. "He helped me disappear. I just returned the favor." They were silent. DeLiesel continued. "I worked with the Teamsters back in the day, Jersey, Buffalo. Helped move trucks across state lines without too many questions. Sal and I knew each other from a shipping job back in '72. "Why'd he come to you?" Dyson asked. "Because he knew I owed him, and because I had the one thing nobody else did, an exit that didn't look like one." He reached under the table and pulled out a folder. Dust rose as he placed it down. Inside were passenger manifests, photocopies of ID, a forged Canadian birth certificate, and a single faded photograph of Sal standing outside a blue fishing cabin, hand raised like a half-hearted wave. "Date?" Markell asked. "August 15th, 1977. 2 weeks after the FBI believed Sal had been burned alive in the cabin outside Lake Placid." DeLiesel smiled. "He burned someone, just not himself." Dyson stiffened. "You helped him fake it." "I helped him reset it," DeLiesel corrected. "He didn't want to disappear. He wanted to reappear when it mattered." Markell's jaw tightened. "Why are you telling us now?" DeLiesel looked out the window. Snow had begun falling, gentle, quiet, patient. "Because he said you'd come." She blinked. "He what?" He said, "One day they'll find the ring. Then they'll find you. Don't lie to them. Don't warn them. Just say this. It's not over yet." Dyson's voice was gravel. "You expect us to believe this was all part of his plan?" DeLiesel leaned forward. "You're still thinking like lawman, like he was just another thug. But Sal wasn't hiding. He was writing the final chapter of a story the rest of you were too stupid to finish." The room went quiet. Outside, the snow fell heavier. Markell flipped through the file. The IDs, the photographs, the stamps. Everything looked authentic. Everything looked real. Too real. She looked up. "Where did he go?" DeLiesel sipped his coffee. "I don't know. After '78, I never saw him again. But once a year, I get a letter." He stood, crossed the room, and pulled a shoebox off a high shelf. Inside were 15 envelopes, each with a single word written on the front. Checkmate. 1 per year. No return address, no writing inside, just the word, always the same, always sent in January. Markel pulled one from the stack. She turned to Dyson. He's still out there. That night, they stayed in a roadside inn just outside the township. Markel couldn't sleep. She sat up, laptop open, cross-referencing the dates of the checkmate letters with major events. 1986, union boss in Detroit gunned down under mysterious circumstances. 1993, a warehouse tied to the Genovese crew burns down in Jersey. 2000, confidential informant in a RICO case disappears before trial. 2008, prosecutor in Newark killed in a robbery that never quite looked like a robbery. All connected? Maybe not, but maybe. Meanwhile, Dyson called Krantz, gave him the summary, Delisle, the crossing, the photo, the letters. Krantz was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We thought we were chasing a man." "We were," Dyson replied. "No," Krantz said. "We were chasing a story, and the son of a bitch has been writing it with our hands this whole time." The next morning, Delisle was gone. The cabin empty. No car, no prints, no note. Just one envelope left in the fireplace. Markel opened it. Inside was a playing card, the King of Spades. On the back in small red ink, the king never moves first, but he always moves last. SB. The letter came in a black envelope, hand-delivered, no return address, no postage stamp, just her name, handwritten in ink so deep it looked like it bled from the page. To Janet Markel, bring Dyson, leave the rest. Inside, a single folded card, heavy stock, expensive, embossed in silver with 2 words, Cold River, and on the back a handwritten time and date, April 5th, 3 p.m. There was no threat, no demand, just the place, the time, and an expectation. It didn't feel like a trap. It felt like an invitation. Cold River was a real place, or had been once. An abandoned logging settlement on the border between New York State and Quebec, left to rot after the timber contracts dried up in the early 1980s. What remained was little more than a church shell, 2 cabins, a stone bridge, and a general store with the windows blown out. No paved roads, no cell towers, no witnesses. The perfect place for a secret. Markel told no one. She and Dyson drove north in an unmarked SUV, crossing into New York, then weaving along forested backroads, guided only by a decades-old topographic map and intuition. Snow still clung to the ditches, soft and wet under the trees. The air smelled of thawing soil and wood smoke from far-off cabins. At 2:58 p.m., they reached the Cold River marker, a splintered wooden sign leaning to one side, almost hidden by vines. Markel killed the engine. They stepped into silence. No birds, no wind. Just the distant creak of wood groaning from age. The town was lifeless, but something was watching. The store was the only building intact enough to enter. Its door hung half open, banging gently against the frame in the breeze. Inside, dust coated every surface like ash. Shelves stood empty. The floor was warped. Broken glass littered the far end, and in the center of the room, beneath a boarded window, sat a table, covered in a white sheet. On it, a chessboard, 2 chairs, one facing north, the other pulled slightly back, like someone had just stood up. A single note sat beside the board. White moves first, but black always waits. Signed, S.B. Dyson circled the table cautiously. "Game's already started," he muttered. Markel followed his gaze. Indeed, several pieces were already moved. Black had taken 2 pawns. White had its queen in an aggressive position. The king was untouched. She sat down slowly. Her seat was white. Dyson stood opposite her, hands resting on the back of the black chair, but he didn't sit. "Are we supposed to play?" "I don't think it's about the game," Markel said. She opened the board's drawer. Inside were 4 objects. 1, a burner phone. 2, a cassette tape. 3, a folded map. 4, a single bullet. She pulled out the tape first. It was labeled, "The Truth Isn't Buried." They drove an hour to the nearest town with a working tape player, a gas station with a Radio Shack attached. Inside the dusty playback room, they fed the cassette into the player. The tape clicked, then hissed. Then the voice came through. Sal. If you've come this far, it means you're listening again. It means the suits in the bureau couldn't silence the questions, couldn't bury the bones. They buried someone, sure, but it wasn't me. You already know that. I didn't vanish to hide. I vanished to live long enough to finish the job. Because the job was never Hoffa. It was the machine behind him. Tony, Russell, Zerilli, the ones who smiled while they cut. They were never punished, not really. And neither were the men who used the Teamsters to launder half of America's backbone. I saw the truth, and I ran, not from justice, but to build my own kind. You don't know what kind of war is coming, but you will. The tape stopped. Dyson stared at the wall. Markel stood slowly, eyes burning. What kind of war? She whispered. Neither answered. Back in the SUV, they unfolded the map. It wasn't topographic. It wasn't geographical. It was symbolic. A chessboard overlaid on the United States. Certain cities marked with black pieces, others with white, some crossed out entirely, others circled in red ink. Next to Detroit, a black queen slashed. Next to Newark, a white pawn tipped. And next to Philadelphia, a black king with the word soon scribbled beside it. It wasn't just a map, it was a scorecard, and someone had been keeping it for decades. Dyson checked the burner phone. One missed call. Voicemail, one new message. He pressed play. No voice, just background noise, wind, steps. Then a sound like wood snapping. Then a whisper, one final move. Click. That night, Markel sat on her hotel bed staring at the map. The pattern was forming, cities connected like pieces on a board, old crimes lining up with forgotten whispers. It wasn't about one murder, not even about Hoffa. It was about the system that protected all of them. And someone, Sal, or someone in his name, had been hunting it from the shadows, not for vengeance, but for balance. The next morning, the burner phone rang. Dyson answered. The voice on the other end was processed, distorted, mechanical, but unmistakably calculated. King's Cross Station, Locker 32, 2 days, bring her, come alone. Click, no repeats, just coordinates and another invitation. Markel turned to Dyson. Where's King's Cross? He looked up slowly. It's not in London. He unfolded the map again. Near the base, in small faded ink, was a hand-drawn symbol next to a cross. King's Cross, Jersey. It wasn't a station. It was an abandoned rail yard outside of Jersey City, a place the Teamsters once used for midnight shipments no one ever logged, and now it would be the site of their final meeting. As they packed, Dyson looked at her and said, "We're being played." "I know," she replied, "but if he's really there, then it ends." "No," Markel said, slipping the tape into her bag. "It never ends. We just flip the board." The rails at King's Cross hadn't carried freight in decades. The yard stretched like a corpse across the edge of Jersey City, rusted tracks swallowed by weeds, cracked pavement peeling like dry skin, train cars frozen in rot. Once, this place had thrummed with midnight shipments, meat, drugs, unmarked crates, cash and duffel bags. Now, it was dead ground. And if the message was true, this was where it would all end. Or begin again. Locker 32 sat inside what remained of the old dispatch station, steel gray, bolted to the wall, dust-covered, untouched, but not forgotten. Dyson and Markel stood in front of it, backs stiff, hearts clenched. The air inside the station was dense with mold and memory. Markel took a breath, then slid in the key, one that had been taped to the bottom of the burner phone they'd been carrying since Cold River. Click, the lock popped open. Inside was a simple black case, the size of a briefcase. No markings, no hinges, no visible lock. But resting on top of it was a note, handwritten in the same pen they'd seen before. Every story ends where it began. Open the case, play the tape, then walk away. SB. They carried the case to the center of the dispatch room, sat it on a metal bench. No bomb squad, no backup, just two people chasing a ghost into the dark. Markel undid the latches. The lid rose. Inside was 1. A cassette recorder already loaded. 2. A sealed envelope marked for her. 3. A sealed envelope marked for him. And at the very bottom, a small wooden box, velvet-lined, pristine. Dyson reached for the tape recorder. It was already powered. He pressed play. The voice that came through was older than before, weaker, gravelly, but deliberate. Salvatore Briguglio. One last time. If you're listening, I'm dead. Or I've disappeared so far I might as well be. Doesn't matter which. What matters is this. You never understood what this was really about. Not Hoffa, not the mob, not the law. It was about something bigger. Power doesn't live in bullets or courtrooms. It lives in the space between them, the silence, the doubt. I spent my life living in that silence, working in it, hiding inside it. But silence is a heavy thing. It fills your lungs. It drowns you, slowly. I killed Jimmy Hoffa. You can stop dancing around it. I did it because I was told to, but I lived with it because I chose to. He trusted me, and I turned that trust into a blade. But the part you never got, the part none of you got, is that Hoffa died long before I touched him. He died the moment he believed the system he helped build wouldn't kill him. And I died the moment I proved him wrong. Markel felt her throat tighten. The tape continued. The FBI wanted a body, the mob wanted a secret, and the country wanted to forget. So I became the answer to all three. I disappeared not because I feared them, but because I knew they'd never stop needing me to be the missing piece. And now, you've earned what's left. There was a click. The tape stopped. A moment passed. Then it auto-reversed. And the final words played, "Tell Lena I kept my promise. I never spoke. Until now." Click. Silence. Markel opened the envelope marked "For Her." Inside was a photograph, black and white, cracked at the edges. It showed Sal, seated on a porch somewhere wooded, beard grown, eyes tired, but smiling. Beside him sat a child, young, maybe 5. Girl, laughing, holding his hand. On the back a message, "She's yours now, not by blood, but by truth. S." She pressed the photo to her chest and exhaled for the first time in minutes. Dyson opened his envelope next. Inside was a chess piece, a white knight, and a message. "You were never the enemy, but you never saw the board. That was your failure. Don't make it hers." Dyson sat down slowly, said nothing. Finally, they opened the wooden box. Inside was a collection of items wrapped in soft cloth. They removed them one by one. A silver ring engraved SB, a signed copy of Hoffa's autobiography with blood spatter on the jacket, a stained napkin from the Red Fox restaurant, dated July 30th, 1975, and a sealed USB drive labeled "For History, Not for Trial." They didn't speak for a long time. Then Markel whispered, "He left his confession, not for courts, for us." Dyson looked at her. "Why?" "Because ghosts don't want justice," she said. "They want to be understood." That night, they returned to D.C. The USB drive was logged as evidence, but a duplicate went somewhere else, to a private archive. Off books, kept quiet. The next day, Markel visited Lena. She placed the photo on the table. Lena didn't weep. She didn't smile. She just nodded and whispered, "He was always good with kids. They didn't ask him questions." 3 months later, the Justice Department quietly closed the Briguglio file. Case status, unresolved, no charges, no grand jury, no press release. But inside a sealed vault, in a file marked H75SB, the full confession was stored, audio, written, and photographic. Only 2 people had access. Neither would ever speak of it. As for Salvatore Briguglio, no one ever saw him again. Not officially. But every few years, someone would report a man in a gray coat walking the woods near Lake Placid, or a fisherman in Alaska with New Jersey hands, or a grandfather in Argentina who refused to be photographed. None could be confirmed. But they didn't need to be, because his final move was never about being found. It was about choosing how the silence ended. And who got to speak next?